Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Pfeffer, and this is Ontario Today. In our first half hour, is your gun connected to your vote?
The other parties are clearly anti-gun owners. They've made that very clear. So obviously this is an issue.
During an appearance before the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, Prime Minister Stephen Harper said gun ownership in rural areas, quote, wasn't just for the farm, it was also for a certain level of security when you're a ways from immediate police assistance. Now that comment resonated with many rural Canadians.
If somebody was coming onto my property to pose a threat to me with a firearm, I would like to be able to defend myself for sure.
My parents, they live out in the country and they definitely have, squirrels and raccoons and other sorts of pests like that where firearms can be needed.
Harper's comments also renewed discussion about gun control, forcing the federal party leaders on the eve of a federal election to once again take a stand on the issue. But if you are a gun owner, does this issue connect to your vote?
If you're in the rural ridings, anything to do with the gun rights, the ownership of firearms, very, very important. It's a crucial factor.
We don't put a burden on those who are respecting and abiding by the law.
That last voice is Federal Public Safety Minister Stephen Blaney. And last summer, he announced the Common Sense Licensing Act, Bill C-42, in a rural Ontario riding where the Conservatives just squeaked through in the last election. Bill C-42 would loosen red tape and make it easier in some provinces to transport weapons. If your license expired, there'd be a grace period instead of jail time. The bill was ready for debate in October, but it was the same day Corporal Nathan Cirillo was shot at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. It was quietly taken off the agenda. Though the bill has been criticized by groups that represent gun owners, many would like to see government get this bill on the books before an election. It's one of several issues in the debate over gun laws as the politicians lobby for voters. If you are a gun owner, does this issue resonate with you? This hour we're asking, is your gun connected to your vote? 1-888-817-8995. And of course, it's Monday, so as always at 12:30, we're switching over to the gardening phone-in. Ed Lawrence is standing by to take your call starting at 12:31. But first, is your gun connected to your vote, or will other factors outweigh it on Decision Day? 1-888-817-8995. Our Twitter handle is at CBC Ontario Today. And our guest this half hour is Tasha Carradine. She's a conservative public policy analyst and a commentator. She writes for the National Post and iPolitics, and she joins us on the line from Whitby, Ontario. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Tell me, let me ask you, which party does this constituency matter to?
I would say that on balance, gun owners tend to, or probably do, vote more conservative. Studies have shown, one done in the United States by the Pew Research Organization, that a gun owner is more likely in that country to identify twice as likely with the Republican Party as with the Democrat, twice as likely to say their ideology is conservative versus liberal. So there's definitely, I think, a tendency to see more gun owners in the conservative ranks, or more conservatives who might own guns. Mm-hmm. But it is also it's an issue that resonates on other levels with these voters as well. I don't think it's necessarily the only question they think of when they go to the ballot box. There are a lot of other characteristics gun owners have that would identify with one party or another.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about that. What's your sense about the impact on gun owners of this kind of issue? Who are we tapping into?
You're tapping into issues that people who own firearms, who may have issues in rural parts of the country regarding safety. That's clearly what Stephen Harper was tapping into when he said, if you are under any kind of threat, essentially, it would help to have a gun around because the police may not get to you in time to deal with that or to assist you. I think also, though, gun owners, most of them anyway, tend to use their guns for sport. So you're looking at people who are hunters, the hunting, angling, fishing community, if you will. That is a big community also that that goes along with gun ownership. Mm-hmm. So, folks who also have an issue of freedom, who see gun ownership as part and parcel of get the government out of my face, and my right to have my firearm, to transport my firearm with fewer restrictions, is part of a general attitude that we should be as free as possible to do what we please.
I'm going to go to the phone lines, but I just want you to paint me a picture here in Ontario of who is this constituency? Where are they?
Well, the constituency is more in rural Ontario than it is in urban Ontario. There are about 500,000 gun owners and registered firearms owners in Ontario, so it's a large enough constituency. But I'd say they're more concentrated. Definitely not concentrated in the Greater Toronto area. We're talking more of a type of rural ridings where the announcement on Bill C-42, for example, was made, because that is where you will find people who use guns more for sport, for protection, or for whatever reason they would have in their daily life.
Okay, why don't we go right to the phones? Why don't we start with Adrian in Kingston? Adrian, how do you feel about this particular issue?
Well, Amanda, my vote is most definitely connected to my firearms for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Conservative Party of Canada is the only party that will represent my interests on the national stage. The NDP has essentially declared me persona non grata, as have the Greens, and the Liberals are the ones who gave us the Firearms Act in the first place. Most Canadians are unaware that the Firearms Act effectively enables a witch hunt against gun owners, probably because Alan Rock believes in collective punishment. Most people are probably unaware that the authorities, the government, the chief firearms officer, can call me up at any time and demand to be allowed entry into my home to inspect my storage solution, all without a warrant. No other Canadian, even sex offenders, can expect this level of invasion of their privacy.
Well, let me ask you this bill, C-42, is a long promise from the Harper government, the Conservatives, to gun owners that he would do something to sort of alleviate some of the red tape involved with the current gun laws. There's a lot of sort of people who are unhappy with Bill C-42, but they do see it as a sort of symbol of a long promise, and yet it still hasn't come. Is it the kind of thing that ticks people off?
I know that there is considerable frustration with the delay and the very narrow scope of the bill. That said, I'd love to have somewhere else to park my vote, but the fact of the matter is that I've really got nowhere else to go. When I make my donations, I might as well earmark them my liberty tax or my stay out of jail tax, because that's essentially that's how I see them. And just to clear up one or two more misconceptions, first of all, a firearms license does not give a person a right to own a gun. Rather, it's a time-limited government-issued dispensation from having to obey the law. And finally, whenever we criticize American gun culture, Canadians should be offended, because the fact of the matter is that Americans are our friends. We share a very long border with these people who are every bit as wonderful and unique and as special as we are. And this idea that if we relax restrictions, that we will have this vigilante culture is just absurd. Yes, Americans do have a cultural problem. They need to sort that out. But the idea that this will be imported here, it's absurd. And any person who puts any modicum of critical thought should dismiss it out of hand whenever they see it.
Well, there's a lot of people who agree with you on this phone in. I think we've got Mike in Windsor. Mike, what's your sense about whether your gun is connected to your vote?
Well, I consider this more or less a wedge issue. I think it's a important philosophical talk that we need to have in Canada here. I firmly support the Castle Doctrine. I'm against the stand your ground laws in the United States, but I firmly believe in the whole idea that and I live in a rural area outside of Windsor, but I firmly believe in the idea that people should be able to protect themselves if they're being attacked on their own premises.
So when you say, no, this is not connected to your vote, in other words, you feel that you're a more nuanced voter, that there are other things that are important to you? Or?
Well, I found it interesting, your first caller. I'm actually an NDP supporter. And so I was particularly unhappy with Thomas Mulcair's description of the Prime Minister's comments as being bizarre. I didn't understand that. I think that it's not bizarre to consider people who are in rural areas who are far away from support by the police to be in a position to have to protect themselves in times of danger.
But yet, is this the issue that is important enough to sway your vote from the NDP, or are there other issues there?
I think there's a lot more important issues. Bill C-42 just takes care of some, I think, from what I know about it, just seems to take care of some annoyances in the current system. But I would like to see a bigger philosophical discussion about the whole Castle Doctrine.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that. Our guest is Tasha Carradine. She's a conservative public policy analyst and commentator. Two interesting calls there, but on the first one, he's a conservative supporter. And you had mentioned to me while we were talking earlier about immediately after the comments, out came the fundraising material on this. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Made by the Prime Minister the morning after. There was a fundraising letter sent by Jenny Byrne, who's the campaign director for the next election, saying how she was proud of Stephen Harper's comments about the use of guns for protection in rural circumstances. And that sort of thing, I think the Tories have to be careful with, because it's seen as a bit crass, a bit opportunistic. Gun owners themselves, the National Firearms Association, have complained and said, the Tories just want our money, and they are opposed to parts of C-42. They want amendments to C-42, but overall, I think there is a sense that many of these situations are being used as fundraising tools, and the gun registry issue certainly was for many years until the Tories abolished that in 2012, and now we're seeing the same kind of thing with these remarks. So the Tories have to be careful. But I did want to say one thing with the last caller and his comments about the NDP. Mr. Mulcair is in a very difficult position because Quebec is probably the most anti-gun province in this country. It's also where the NDP has the most seats of their caucus. So he has to walk that line between appealing to voters like your caller and also realizing that he's playing to a constituency in Quebec that, because of the history there of guns and the Montreal Massacre, is very anti-gun.
Our number is 1-888-817-8995. Our Twitter handle is at CBC Ontario Today. And I want to go to Robert in Elliott Lake. Robert, is your gun connected to your vote?
Well, in a way, ma'am, but I do have to say I'm more nuanced than that. But I look at firearms are more like a litmus test when it comes to government policy and social opinion, I guess, of the normalization of creeping totalitarianism, or the acceptance of a totalitarianism. Seems most people that are against the firearms in general are completely fine with sweeping police powers and the militarization of our police forces and that type of thing. It's just their neighbor can't let the neighbor have a rifle, but the police can have an armored car and machine guns, and that's A-okay. So it is definitely something that I consider when I vote now.
It's very interesting you bring that up. It's interesting today in the news, for instance, one of the gun organizations was going to speak during the discussion or hearings over Bill C-51. This is the anti-terrorism law, and gun owners have some concerns that their privacy might be breached with the anti-terrorism law. So there's some interesting connections there. Do you see those as well, Robert?
Definitely in some ways, but when it comes to Bill C-51, a lot of people are focusing on Mr. Harper and his party because of that. But it's just a growth. C-51 is a growth off of previous liberal policies that could throw people in jail without habeas corpus and whatnot. So it's a creeping totalitarianism, and I think it goes beyond individual party boundaries.
Mm-hmm. As you say, it's the litmus test. Very interesting, Robert. We've got Frank in Toronto. Frank, is your gun connected to your vote?
Not so anymore. I guess I want to start by saying the only reason the Tories are doing this is to get votes. I mean, that first caller shouldn't get warm and fuzzy that the Conservatives are this and that. They're just doing this. This is an election gimmick. That's all it is, nothing more.
And you don't see it as our very last caller who said it's a litmus test for the values of, small c conservative government should sort of not dictate gun ownership. There's a liberty issue there. You don't see that connection.
It might be, but I still don't think the Tories are doing it for that reason. They're just looking to scour votes right now because after October, this isn't even going to be a thought in Mr. Harper's mind. This is just strictly an election election gimmick.
Okay.
That's all it is.
Okay, and may I ask you, does it matter to you how the other parties stand on the issue of firearms? Does that irritate you, or how are you feeling about that?
I agree they should, and this is yeah, we do need a sort of gun control, or we're going to end up like the U.S. where it's a free-for-all, and certainly the murder rate there is well into the 5 figures and 6 figures. So, unfettered gun access equals a lot of gun deaths, so that does happen. Now, at the same time, I don't think there is really a problem in rural areas, because I think the Tories are trying to bring up a problem where none exists, because most rural people do have firearms for the hunting and varmints and stuff like that. It's not really an issue.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Frank. Our number is 1-888-817-8995. Our Twitter handle is at CBC Ontario Today. Let me take another call here. We've got Margaret in London, Ontario. Margaret, is your gun attached to your vote?
I don't have a gun, and I would never own one.
Okay, so this is not. This issue is you're on the other side of this issue. Does it make a difference to you? Your lack of gun ownership is Mr. Harper's stand on gun ownership an irritant for you?
It's an extreme irritant. I was living in Montreal at the time of the Polytechnique massacre, and that wasn't the only incident of nasty gun violence where innocent people were killed. The father of one of my sister's school friends was killed, and another of them. And the other thing that really bothers me is that when my mother was terminally ill in hospital, the elderly lady who was sharing the room with her had family who were gun owners. And they were very pleased that they had been able to stymie the registration system for the long gun registry by tying up the line, by being difficult in the whole registration process, and then purposely hanging up just before the whole thing was finished so they could start over and tie up the line some more.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have much sympathy.
All right. Well, Margaret, I want to thank you for your call. We've got Robert in Sault Ste. Marie. Robert, are you a gun owner?
Yes, I am.
And how are you feeling about this issue?
I look at gun ownership as, it's not a right, it's a privilege, and it's a responsibility. And I'm honestly, as a gun owner and someone I enjoy hunting and that, I don't understand a lot of the angst and anger and debate towards more regulation of gun ownership. It's as a gun owner, I have certain responsibilities to, keep my guns stored safely, to use them safely, and in a responsible manner. And
does it irritate you when you see some parties take a stand, sort of a very strong stand on gun control, that some people who own guns feel is unnecessary? What is your position? Is that an irritant, even though it doesn't force your vote?
Well, I'm a bit confused by the whole thing. If parties, want to push gun control or more liberal gun use as part of their party platform, well, hey, good for them. But the bottom line is, if you're going to own a gun, I don't see what the problem is for it being something that you have to be responsible. And part of being responsible, I think, is being accountable for what we own.
Okay.
We, as gun owners, we do own something that's capable of harming someone else, even if that's not the reason why we own it. And I don't understand why people are so upset that the government or the police have that information.
All right, Robert, I want to thank you very much for making your call. We've got John in Peterborough. John, is your gun connected to your vote?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, when the Conservatives got in the last time, they promised that they were going to get rid of the long gun registry, and they did. They kept their promise. That's rare in any politician.
Right.
But I don't agree with most of the Conservative policies, but it's like trying to tell me that I can't play hockey. It's like, it's my hobby. It's what I enjoy doing.
So that's interesting. So there are on some issues you don't necessarily support the Conservative Party, but
probably 75%.
Okay, and so, but you would continue to vote for them on this issue.
Yes.
And so this issue obviously trumps all others for you.
Yeah, everything else is going to come out in the wash anyways. We're still going to have health care. We're still going to have, most of the basics that Canadians have. And they're all going to lie to us, and they're all going to do whatever they want anyways. As far as I'm concerned, they kept their promise on the long gun registry, so why shouldn't I vote for them again?
Very interesting. Well, thank you, John, for giving us a call. And let me go to Perry in Ajax. Perry, what's your position on this? Is your gun attached to your vote?
It is certainly a factor that is considered in the vote. And I certainly understand, John, your last caller's views, especially when some of the political parties almost want to vilify us for being gun owners. And it's rather unwelcoming. I don't belong to any political party, and I've voted for all three in the past. But this is an important issue to many hunters and sports shooters, and as I said, particularly when we feel vilified by certain parties.
Perry, our guest is Tasha Carradine. She says it's sort of like a litmus test on other small C conservative values and issues. Would you agree with that?
Wholeheartedly. I think that's actually very astute. I've probably voted Liberal more than for any other party in the past. And yet when the Conservative government introduced C-42, the Liberal Party put on their Facebook page an infographic saying that, and I own restricted firearms, that restricted firearms owners would now be able to take their weapons to grocery stores and malls. And I mean, that is just an utter falsehood. And that really offends me. So it's not necessarily that I'm pro-conservative and that's who I want to support, but the other parties are making it impossible for me to want to give them my support because, they certainly don't support my rights to responsibly own my firearms.
Very interesting. Well, Barry, you're our last call, and I want to thank you very much for making that call. Tasha Carradine is a conservative public policy analyst and commentator, and she writes for the National Post and iPolitics. Last word to you, Tasha. We did see just in the latest news that one of the gun lobbies did not take part in hearings today on Bill C-51. It does suggest how complicated this issue is.
Yes, it does. They did so because they said that it seems to be increasing the presence of a police state, was their spokesperson's statement on it. Without further details, though, we don't know exactly what in it does that. But it will be interesting to see whether there is more opposition from the gun lobby or the gun rights advocates against C-51, or if it quiets down, and how fast C-42 gets through the legislature, and whether there are amendments made to C-42, because we know that many people want to see amendments to that bill. And is there a push behind the scenes to get Bill C-42 passed before an election is called? Absolutely. No, if C-42 is not passed, you're going to get people probably like the caller who appreciated the fact the Tories kept their promise on the long gun registry, very angry that they haven't taken further measures to liberalize, for example, some of the transportation and other issues that affect the gun-owning community. And just lastly, the impact on Quebec voters, this issue for the Conservative Party. Well, in Quebec, the Conservatives would like to see gains, and we know that in urban areas in particular, Quebec is very anti-gun, but I think the Tories are banking on the fact that perhaps in the more rural areas of Quebec, that there will be some support for their position on this issue. Well, Tasha Carradine, I want to thank you very much for joining us. The gardening phone-in is next, 1-888-817-8995.